Christians often ask the saints in heaven for their intercession, to be their heavenly prayer partners. Normally, they're thinking of the human saints who are up there, but occasionally they'll ask their guardian angels or one of the other angels, like St. Michael or St. Gabriel, for prayer. Either way, they often think of the idea of heavenly intercessors as something new, something that came in with the Christian age. But as we're going to see today, that's not true. Howdy, folks. If you like this content, you can help me out by liking, commenting, writing a review, sharing the podcast, and subscribing. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure and hit the bell notification so you always get notified when I have a new video. You can also support the podcast and get early access to new episodes by going to patreon.com/Jimmy Akin Podcast. Scripture describes angels performing a variety of functions. One is they serve as messengers between God and man. In fact, that's what the term angel means. It means messenger. Scripture also shows them guarding God's throne, it shows them worshiping God, and it shows them carrying out His will on earth. So angels have a lot of functions, but one function there was a widespread Jewish belief in was intercession. The Second Temple period in Jewish history stretched from when the Jewish people rebuilt the temple after the Babylonian exile through its destruction by the Romans. It covers the period between about 515 BC to about AD 70. The literature of this period robustly attests to Jewish belief in the intercession of angels with God on behalf of men. This is seen in multiple books from the period. For example, the book known as First Enoch contains a section that's called the Book of the Watchers, which was written sometime in the 200s BC, or possibly earlier than that. At one point in the Book of the Watchers, the angels Michael, Sariel, Raphael, and Gabriel are up in heaven looking down at the situation on earth just before the flood, and they see all the violence and bloodshed that's taken place. Then they go back in God's heavenly temple and discuss the situation. And entering in, they said to one another, "The earth, devoid of inhabitants, raises the voice of their cries to the gates of heaven. And now to us, the holy ones of heaven, the souls of men make suit, saying, Bring in our judgment to the Most High, and our destruction before the glory of the majesty, before the Lord of all lords in majesty." So this text portrays the humans down on earth and their souls asking the angels in heaven to intercede with God for them to do something about the problems that they're facing or that have even killed them. The angels then do intercede with God about what's happening on earth, and He sends them to address the problems. The root of the problems is a group of fallen angels called the Watchers, and so one of the things that God does is send Michael to take the fallen Watchers and chain them up until Judgment Day. This is like in 2 Peter 2:4, where Peter refers to how God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to pits of deepest darkness to be kept until the judgment. It's also like in Jude 6, where Jude says, "The angels that did not keep their own position, but left their proper dwellings, have been kept by Him in eternal chains in the deepest darkness until the judgment of the great day." Back in First Enoch, once these angels are chained up, they contact the human patriarch Enoch and ask him to go intercede with God for them. But when he does so, God is not sympathetic, and he tells Enoch, "Go and say to the Watchers of heaven, who sent you to petition in their behalf, you should petition in behalf of humans, and not humans in behalf of you." So we see how this passage also envisions one of the proper functions of angels as interceding for mankind. They're meant to be two-way messengers. They both carry messages from God to us and messages from us to God. Another book from the Second Temple period is the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs, which is a set of speeches given by the 12 sons of Jacob to the tribes that descend from them. In the Testament of Dan, the patriarch Dan tells his descendants, "Draw near to God and to the angel who intercedes for you, because he is the mediator between God and men for the peace of Israel." And in the Testament of Levi, Levi tells his descendants, There with God are the archangels, who serve and offer propitiatory sacrifices to the Lord in behalf of all the sins of ignorance of the righteous ones. They present to the Lord a pleasing odor, a rational and bloodless oblation. This highlights the function of angels as priests in God's heavenly temple. One of the functions of priests is to intercede with God for the people. Here, the archangels are offering bloodless sacrifices to God on account of the sins that God's righteous people have committed in ignorance. So the archangels are interceding with God for the righteous. In a book known as The Life of Adam and Eve, the Greek version of which is also known as the Apocalypse of Moses, Eve is recounting to their children what happened when she and Adam were kicked out of the garden. And she says, "Your father wept before the angels opposite paradise, and the angels said to him, 'What do you want us to do for you, Adam?' Your father answered and said to the angels, 'See, you are casting me out. I beg you, let me take fragrances from paradise, so that after I have gone out, I might bring an offering to God, so that God will hear me.' And they came to God and said, 'Yael, eternal King, command that fragrant incenses from paradise be given to Adam.'" So here the angels intercede with God on behalf of Adam, and he grants their request. God then orders that Adam be allowed to take fragrant substances from the Garden of Eden so that he can offer incense to God in the future. Later, Adam dies at the age of 930, and Eve says to her son Seth, "Look up with your eyes and see the seven heavens opened, and see with your eyes how the body of your father lies on its face, and all the holy angels are with him, praying for him, and saying, 'Forgive him, O Father of all, for he is your image.'" And God forgives Adam. So, across all these works of Second Temple Jewish literature, we see a widespread belief that angels intercede with God on behalf of men, which is only natural since one of their functions is to serve as priests in God's heavenly temple, and interceding for people is what priests do. By the way, I've done Mysterious Worlds on some of these books, so you can check them out for more information. I discuss First Enoch in episodes 323 and 324, which are at mysterious.fm/323 and mysterious.fm/324, and I discuss the life of Adam and Eve in episodes 346 and 347, which are coming out in January. Of course, a person can object that the books we've quoted from thus far aren't in the Bible, so they're not scripturally authoritative. And that's true, but they do testify to a widespread belief in angelic intercession in the Second Temple Jewish community, and that can shed light on biblical passages, both in the Old and the New Testaments. So let's take a look at that. Does the Old Testament contain any passages referring to angelic intercession in heaven? Indeed it does. First, in the book of Tobit, the angel Raphael reveals that he interceded for Tobit and Sarah, and he says, "And so, when you and your daughter-in-law Sarah prayed, I brought a reminder of your prayer before the Holy One. And when you buried the dead, I was likewise present with you." Now, Tobit is part of the Catholic Old Testament and the Orthodox Old Testament, making it part of the Bible that is used by the majority of Christians, but it's not part of the Protestant Bible, though even for them, it would still count as yet another work of Second Temple Jewish literature testifying to the belief in angelic intercession. However, there are also references to angelic intercession in books that are part of the Hebrew Scriptures and that are part of the Protestant Old Testament. For example, in Job 16:19, Job refers to having an intercessor with God in heaven. He says, "Even now, behold, my witness is in heaven, and he who testifies for me is on high." Now, taking this verse out of context, you might think that Job is referring to God as his advocate in heaven, but he's not, as the context makes clear. Job goes on to say that he wishes that he, the witness, would argue the case of a man with God, as a son of man does with his neighbor. So Job says that he wishes his advocate would argue his case before God, which means that his advocate is not God. It's an angel who is testifying or interceding for him. Job's friends also acknowledged that there are angels interceding in heaven. Later in Job 33, his friend Elihu says, "If there be an angel, a mediator, one of the 1,000, to declare to man what is right for him, then man prays to God and he accepts him." And it's not just in Job that we find this. For example, Zechariah 1:12 reveals that the angel of the Lord intercedes for the Jewish people. The text says, "Then the angel of the Lord said, O Lord of hosts, how long will you have no mercy on Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, against which you have been angry these 70 years? So the angel of the Lord intercedes with God, asking him to have mercy on Judah after the 70 years of the Babylonian exile. Once again, we find belief in angelic intercession. And this isn't confined to the Old Testament. It's also found in the New Testament. For example, in Matthew 18:10, Jesus himself says, "See to it that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I tell you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven." Now, you might think, oh, that's nice. These angels always see God's face. How nice for them. But this would miss Jesus' point. What he's saying is that the angels of the little ones have guaranteed access to God so that they can intercede for the little ones under their care. That's why Jesus says, do not despise the little ones, for if you do and you mistreat them, their angels are guaranteed to tell God about it and intercede for the little ones, and it won't go well for you. This text isn't about God doing something nice for the angels. It's about the angels doing something that will benefit the ones they guard. We also see angelic intercession in the book of Revelation. Specifically, we see it in chapter 8, where John witnesses this. "And another angel who had a golden censer came and stood before the altar, and a large amount of incense was given to him in order that he could offer the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar that is before the throne. And the smoke of the incense went up before God with the prayers of the saints from the hand of the angel." So here we see an angel in heaven that is offering incense at God's altar in heaven. This again points to the angel being a priest in God's heavenly temple, because offering incense was one of the duties of priests. In fact, there was an altar of incense in God's earthly temple in Jerusalem where human priests ministered, and here we're seeing the heavenly equivalent of that. Incense is used in the Bible as a symbol of prayer because the smoke of incense rises upward to heaven like we want our prayers to rise up to God. Thus, Psalm 141 verse 2 says, "Let my prayer be counted as incense before you." Revelation is drawn on that imagery, and so it says that the angel was given incense in order that he could offer the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar before God's throne. In the New Testament, the term saint is often used to refer to live-in Christians, people down on earth. So what we see here is the angel functioning as a priest of God in his heavenly temple, taking the prayers of all the saints, including the living ones down on earth, and presenting them to God using the symbol of incense. Thus we read that the smoke of the incense went up before God with the prayers of the saints from the hand of the angel. Except angels aren't physical beings, so they don't literally have hands. Instead, angels are created intellects. Everything they do mentally. So this symbol represents an angel mentally presenting the prayers of the saints to God. In other words, he's interceding for them, just as you'd expect of a heavenly priest. We thus see abundant evidence for ancient Jewish and Christian belief in the fact that angels intercede for us. We see this in the Old Testament, we see this in Second Temple Jewish literature outside the Old Testament, and we see it in the New Testament. In fact, Jesus himself indicates that they're doing this. Of course, prior to the time of Christ, with few exceptions, the angels were the only ones with God up in heaven. Humans generally weren't admitted yet. So, what do you think is going to happen after the resurrection of Jesus when humans get to go to heaven, especially the humans who are a kingdom of priests? That's what we'll talk about next time. If you like this content, you can help me out by liking, commenting, writing a review, sharing the podcast, and subscribing. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure and hit that bell notification so you always get notified when I have a new video. You can also support the podcast and get early access to new episodes by going to patreon.com/Jimmy Akin Podcast. Thank you, and I'll see you next time. God bless you always.